about AI and in education, because more and more we're seeing this happening, and education then stems onto all the different professions, and you find AI is being used constantly all over. Where it's from, where it's going, and what's going to be the final impact of it all. This is the big question. Studio number today is 0116 4822 If you want to phone in and join in, do WhatsApp or message also 077 488 55055. That's the number. Or you can send a message on the social media platforms. But do join in this very interesting conversation. We're going to be talking about AI. What's your view on AI, listeners out there? So you can actually, that's my first comment already, and you can start sending that in while we're having a discussion here, and I'll come back to your points also, hopefully, as we're going along. Time is short, it's about 42 minutes only for this session, so here we go. So if you look at history, Zahir, you know what's happened over time. Remember the first time, mashallah, education coming in, when I've been in education for a very long time, and in my classroom, long time ago, when I actually started, there used to be a chalk on blackboard, okay, and we used to write on there. Imagine, it was very interesting. Your hands get all chalky and messy, but that was one of the mediums. Then technology got a bit better, and then the overhead projector came along. Those listening out there, probably my age, they might remember at school the overhead projector. There's this big lamp, and you get this transparent sheet, and you write on there, and what happens, the light emits from there and gives a shadow, and you see it on the screen. Wow, what technology that was. And then we moved on. But then we had the smart boards coming along, big screens, mashallah, and displaying on there. And technology changed also. The life of computers came along, and then things moved on further, especially at the time of COVID, and everything became online and blended learning. So there was a whole spectrum of changes there. But then more recently, past few years, it's been there for quite a long time actually, but more specifically, it's been open in the public now, and it's coming into industry and in schools, is this concept of AI. So, Zahir, I know, tell us about what you've done with AI and how do you fit into all this?
Yes, I think I'll probably start with a bit of a backdrop from like last summer. So last summer, just before sort of coming back to school, in the last couple of weeks, I like to just look at, what I can sort of research, what I can add, just to sort of hone our craft of teaching and just to make it a little bit better. And that's always quite an exciting time for me, where if I've learned something new, I can sort of bring that into the classroom. But obviously, AI has been around since 2022, 2023, somewhere there. But really, you can't just use ChatGPT, and ChatGPT is not going to be teaching inside the classroom. So I was looking at how can we actually, embed AI into education. So in my research, I came across a school in America. So it's a school in Texas called Alpha Schools. And what they've done, they've actually used an AI platform where students just use that platform for 2 hours every morning. And they do some of the core subjects like reading, maths, and another 2 subjects. So they do 4 subjects every morning over 2 hours, so 30 minutes each. But then basically, once they do that, the rest of the afternoon is theirs, and it's more just focusing on life education, life skills, which to me, I think are really important, which, although academic, sort of subjects, grades, and knowledge is important, I think equally as important is the life education as well. And I found that one school model to be very interesting, where they've actually embedded both. Not only that, in their academic education, they're sort of scoring the top 1% in the whole country.
Okay,
so just with 2 hours, which is really surprising.
Okay. Before we carry on,
yeah,
I heard a lot of acronym words happening there. So we start with AI, ChatGPT, and dear listeners out there, you might be also wondering, what is this AI? I'm sure you've heard keywords popping up everywhere. You're hearing about deep fake and machine learning and deep learning. ChatGPT is very common, we're hearing. And then some of you might have heard of AI agents. What's all that about? And then also within there, we hear words like hallucination. Straight thing. When I think about hallucination, I'm seeing things. Is that what it's all about? So in fact, there's a whole new vocabulary, and there's a whole new spectrum of different words which are coming, a new glossary in itself. So maybe you can just highlight on what is all this?
Yeah, so I think just starting off with ChatGPT, I mean, you're the AI champion, so if I do make some mistakes over here, please do correct me.
Professor AI.
Professor AI. So yeah, there's ChatGPT, there's Claude by Anthropic, there's Gemini, there's Copilot. There's a whole suite of these now, and
these are all applications.
These are all they're large language models. Yeah. They've been trained with lots and lots of data, machine learning algorithms, and they're sort of based on that, and that's kind of what we're using. So I think the way people use them, it almost seems like there's another human on the other side, but it's not that. It's just a large language model that's been trained with lots and lots of data.
So tell me, for example, we start with AI and artificial intelligence. If you don't know, listeners out there, that's what it means, artificial intelligence. It's not apples and indigo or something like that. It's artificial intelligence. But at the same time, what is the difference? Because I go on Google, but we used to do a Google search before. If I do a Google search and an AI search, what's the difference?
Yeah, I think there's positives and negatives. So if you had something that you wanted to just find out about, you could just Google it, and that would be the thing that you do. With AI, you can just sort of use ChatGPT to get or come up with some answers, but at the same time, with it, there is the sort of dangers of hallucination. But at the same time, it's not just a search engine. You can sort of do a whole wide of things and use it for lots and lots of different uses. Especially right now, it's actually very, very good for software developers with the coding that it's actually doing.
So you mentioned, the word hallucination came in again. I think we'll just elaborate on that. So I'm getting messages through already. Okay. But hallucination, somebody's just joining in to listen. Hallucination, if you don't know what that means, anybody, right, we'll just elaborate on that. It's basically when you use you're putting in some keywords, some descriptions. The actual descriptions and the keywords that we put in is called what? Begin with P.
Prompt engineering.
Prompt engineering. Yeah. Thank you. That. Okay, so prompt are the keywords we put in on this platform of this AI agent, and then what happens is that we put it in and we get results from it. Sometimes you put things in, and then you'll find that the wrong information or inaccurate information comes out. Yeah. That is hallucination. Hallucination is, and they used to use this terminology before, GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. So you put rubbish in, rubbish comes out. So this is the kind of thing that would be produced from there. Now, you mentioned earlier, before we carry on, about basically how AI works. So you got to understand, the dear listeners out there, what happened is that you're typing in there, for example, I would like to know all the best packages of going for Umrah, right? So you might just put that in, and then you get some results coming out from there. So what it does, information it puts in, the data, the big data out there, and machine learn. The whole point here is that learning from the data there, looking at pattern recognitions, and from there, machine learning, and from that machine learning, that it produces some sort of a result. But that's generative. We keep on hearing the word generative. Generative means that as we're going along, you're refining it, and it's like a chatbot where you're asking a question, it's responding back, it's giving you suggestions back and forth, and it's refining the model more and more to give you more in-depth or focused result. So that is at the moment how we're seeing AI. Vast majority, you ask somebody what's AI about, they'll just say ChatGPT. They'll say, okay, what to use it for? I'll just get information from there. So it's quite specific in that manner, but there's more to that. Let's just carry on. Your research that you've been doing, and tell us more.
Yeah, so I think that was like the sort of moment that I thought, okay, I need to research into the technologies further and looking at the school. So going back to the Alpha School story. So I was just really interested. I thought, how is it that they're just doing 2 hours and they're getting the top 1% of results in the country? Although this is quite a new school, so it's not been peer reviewed, but these are their own results that they're putting out there. So I just mentioned that. The other interesting thing that I thought is actually the principal is actually a tech billionaire. So the reason that was quite interesting is when I think of billionaires, obviously there's lots of different ways to think about billionaires, but one way to think of a billionaire is that they do sort of add a lot of value, in the world. So if we think, like, even for example right now, let's just say this goes on YouTube later, those guys are billionaires because they've touched billions of lives, they've impacted billions of people. Our phones, Apple phone, I've got Apple Watch, billionaire.
So you're saying billionaire is not the financial
Yeah,
amount that makes a billionaire.
it's a
but
value
it's the,
creation.
the billionaire, as in you've had a billion impact on individuals,
Yes,
right?
yes,
So
yes.
it's not just financial then.
You could explore so many different examples. I mean, we use like Microsoft Word, Microsoft, like when we're teaching, we're using PowerPoint all the time. Bill Gates, we're buying things from Amazon, Jeff Bezos. So all these billionaires, these big names like Elon Musk, there'll be lots of people, our listeners, who have Tesla cars. So all these sort of products and services that we're using, especially when it comes from billionaires, they think of global value creation and they want to impact billions. So when I thought of this principle, and his name is Joe Lamont, and you guys can sort of look into it as well. So I was thinking, if he's making this product, he's probably making it, for the masses. And I even actually got in contact with them just to see whether I could sort of trial their technologies. Unfortunately, right now it's already built for K-12 education, which is the American schooling system. But I thought, okay, what other alternatives are out there? Because I just like the model. I like the fact that the academic was quite condensed in 2 hours, and then the rest of it was, just life education throughout the day, which I feel like is an equally important but often neglected part of the current education system.
Okay, before we carry on, I just want to point out there, the text number is 0774888555055. What's your view on AI? What do you think AI is all about, and is it good? I'll just pose that out there so as we're going along, we can see your responses on this. So 0774888555055, 87.7 FM. You're with me, Khalid Patel and Zahid Patel, and we are talking about AI. So, so the school you're talking about, and they're the top one, they're getting the impact of top 1% of results and attainment. So, you tell me, for education, what did you deduce from your research? So how can education be benefiting with AI?
Yeah, I think what they've actually done is, because it was a billionaire that started, he's got some of the best software developers, in the world. He's got gaming developers. He's looked at, he's an ex sort of university student of Stanford University. So especially in Stanford University, he's talked about 40 years of learning science. So, pedagogies, learning styles, the things that we're using right now in school, Rosenshine principles, active recall, scaffolding, feedback. But what they've actually utilized all of that sort of all of that knowledge and that learning science and that pedagogy, and they've built this sort of AI. The actual app, if any listeners want to look at it again, is called Time Back. So again, it's really good, especially if you're in America. From what I've sort of researched on it, and it's even good if you're just a homeschooling student. Like I said, he does want to impact the masses, so he is even selling it as software, as SaaS software, and I'll just elaborate on SaaS. So software as a subscription service.
Okay.
So
but these you have to pay then.
You have to pay. Obviously, he's in it for the money.
Okay.
He's not going to say that. Of course.
And that's another thing we can discuss in a bit.
Yes, yes.
Quick message, Farhan Farouk, great show and knowledge. I'm an AI SME, okay, it's subject matter expert, and this is a good knowledge for people who ask open generic questions. Good question, right? Okay. Good to see you, old teacher. Oh, there you are. That's just made us happy, and when you see students there, and he's an AI SME. Well done, you, Farhan. Right, mashallah. Maybe we should have a contact, and we can take this further. We can bring you in as an alumni, maybe, and that'd be really good. Anyway. That's a different thought. Okay, so education benefits. You just summarize and tell me what, if you had 5 benefits, what would you say for education? How would we benefit with AI?
I think the biggest benefit, I think, if we're just sort of wrapping it up under one thing, actually, would just be it makes knowledge transmission more efficient, and that's a huge thing. So if I just elaborate on what that means, then. Like, let's just say we're taking 5 hours or 5 lessons to teach one concept to a class. AI could do that in half the time, in one third of the time, in one quarter of the time. So what you can then actually get from the AI is more personalized learning.
So you literally going to save time, basically.
You're going to save time.
So
the students
okay,
are going to
okay,
save time.
let me give you an example now. Now you've got a lesson for 1 hour, yeah? You're teaching a subject for 1 hour. And then all of a sudden it would take you 60 minutes to teach that topic, for example, on traditional methods.
Mm-hmm.
Now using AI, we're saying that we can do it 5, for example, yeah? So 5 minutes compared to 60 minutes. So we have now got 55 minutes left of teaching time. So now what we're going to do with that, are we just going to go in more in depth on that learning within that topic, or are they just going to be switching off right in that 55 minutes and doing something else? Or so it's something to think about. So obviously we're saving time on one side and it's more efficient. And on the same time, to put a spin on it, how do we know as a facilitator, as a teacher or educationist, that the content that they produce is sound and accurate?
So I'll talk a little bit about my further research that I've done, with my master's studies on these platforms. But actually, just answering your first question, that division of time, so if the learning time is a lot shorter, then what would you do with the rest of the time? And I think we could just go back to a similar model, a little bit like Alpha Schools is doing, wherein they're condensing all of the academic side in the mornings, but then in the afternoon, now you've got this opportunity to teach more, life skills, life education. They're teaching entrepreneurship, business. They're teaching resilience, leadership, grit, and it's all again research based, and it's like some of it's really interesting about some of the things that they've actually done with the time.
So more. So you got the balance of knowledge and nurturing.
Absolutely.
These are the 2 aspects of school,
Yes.
of institutes, of madrasas, of darulums, of all universities.
Yes.
There's 2 things there. One is the knowledge base and the skill base, and one is the nurturing of this individual while they're going through this process. So now we're saying with AI, the knowledge is more efficient, so they're going to get that quicker. So you got more of now a percentage or possibility of working on the nurturing.
I think you've summarized that really beautifully over there. So,
Okay.
So yeah,
without the use of AI in chat.
So actually, earlier this week I was talking to Hamza Farouk, who I work with as well, and I was saying that if like computers and AI are doing a lot of the academic side, then we could focus more on the human side. So the nurturing, and he even used the word. He goes, "Yeah, tarbiyah." So I was like, "Yeah, of course." That human development is where we could actually be focusing and splitting more of the education time. So if like ta'aleem, which is the ilm or the knowledge, is a lot shorter, and I'm talking about the academic schooling knowledge, so you could have like the ilm or the knowledge side, which is shorter. That gives you more time for the nurturing or the holistic development of young people.
Yeah. I'm going to put a real big spin on this now. Okay.
Yeah.
The scenario before, a couple of years ago, forget AI, forget online life, forget on the computers, right? The traditional method before, okay, you give a student a piece of homework to find out about, for example, the climate of the Sahara Desert. So what they will do, so okay, as part of their homework, so at home they're not going to have the knowledge resource, so they might go to the library. They go to the library, so actually physically come out of their house and go to the library. And then in the library, the concept of actually finding, using the librarian or the system there, finding which aisle has the book. They go to the aisle, they go to that section, look at a couple of books there, interpret which book will have the information, take that book out, open the book, and then they read through it and actually make notes on it. And then from making those notes, present it in a format that the teacher might want, and then eventually present it or submit that work in. So that took a long time to do, number one, but they went through this process. As compared to a student in 30 seconds at the touch of a button to get it all, copy and paste it on and submit that. How is that in education?
Yeah, it's sort of like, that's obviously accelerated things very, very quickly. So, you could get all of that research and then export it into a PowerPoint, and that's a PowerPoint presentation done. So a lot of that, again, I think sometimes, especially with assessment, that might need changing going forward.
Do you think they've learned that the students compared? I'll just give you the two comparisons there. Dear listeners, what's your thought on this? 077 488 55055. So in that 30 seconds, they've got the information. Have they learned anything or not? Because it's all about learning here. Because remember, we're all learning, whether we're at school, college, university, at work, in our profession, at home, whole life we're learning. The concept of learning, how do you learn? Are we thinking now how AI is affecting that? Are they learning?
I think if they, prompt engineer well, then they could actually get to the right information that they need. So in your previous sort of analogy and example, you talked about the whole process of finding the book and finding the area. But that could just be, if you are very specific within your, sort of prompt, you'd get that information. If that student was taking in that information, as long as AI wasn't hallucinating, then again, there is some merit to some learning taking place.
But then the prompt engineering, basically, listeners out there, is basically when you put in the commands or the script or the keywords together, describing what you want, the better the prompt engineering, the better the script or the description that you put in, the better you're going to get the result from AI. And there are a whole list of databases already available where you can actually get prompts for, and professionals do that. But then it opens the doors of deep fake, right? And this is a big issue now. Now, one is that the deep fake you could have on the homework and the coursework, but deep fake on images and videos and sound, and then it all goes into safeguarding and the issues there. What's your thought on that, Zaid?
I think especially from a data privacy safeguarding, I think everyone needs to be very, very careful, because a lot of this data is just going, and especially if you're putting too much personal information, like with anything, that can be very, very problematic. But along with all the data that these big tech companies have already, this is another layer of a lot of very deep personal data that these big data companies can be collecting.
And you got to understand the open AI, where the vast majority of the public are using at the moment. They're going to the free version of ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini, whatever. They haven't subscribed for it. It's not a premium version, and because of that, it's open AI. So they are putting in information, blah blah, and they're getting information. I think, oh, this is amazing. I'm getting all this rich information. Now all of a sudden, everybody's become an expert. But then it's an open AI. So that data is going somewhere. Where is it going? That's a big question. And then what's deciding from there? The algorithms behind that, which is actually being focused towards us. That's why you find the profiling issue. You might have heard about profiling, where dear listeners out there, where we put data in, and especially with AI, we're putting information in, and we're using these open AI generic platforms. So what's happening is looking at our pattern of what kind of information we're putting in, and then focusing advertising and marketing towards us. How many times that we are sitting here and we're talking about all of a sudden holidays, and on your social media things pop up of holidays, and where did this come from? It's because at the end of it, you got to understand, like, it is not just the data going in. You've got the camera there, you've got the sound there, you've got Siri there, and all these are adding, obviously, and if your privacy settings aren't really set on a high level, then you're going to find that it's all open, that every information going through towards this big data that's going along there. So there is an issue. The other thing I'm going to mention, Zaid, here is that obviously we talked about saving time, and we talked about how it gives the opportunity of opening creativity, maybe, and we're also talking about the other side of deep fake and issues there. Generally, how did that school, what did they do that you researched into that made that big impact? How did the students respond? How did the staff respond? How did the parents respond?
Yeah, good question. I think the first thing to sort of just be very mindful of is not to think of what Alpha Schools is doing and just to try and replicate that process. It's just to be used as a thought exercise, that this is a model that's being used. It's being used successfully in a different part of the world, but they have got completely different demographics. It's it's a private school. It's in Austin, Texas, where you've got two massive companies of Tesla and Elon Musk. So you've got probably a lot of their engineers and their children attending, and they're paying, sort of somewhere between $30,000 and $40,000 per year. So obviously the parents is going to be their backing, and the students themselves, they need to sort of buy into it as well. And on top of that, they've got this very elite edtech software that they're using at the moment. So it's, like I said, it's a model to try to sort of think about, but at the same time, it's also going to have some negatives in terms of the things that we're talking about: data, privacy, safeguarding. So even if we were to implement a similar structure within schools over here, these are big things that we need to think about. However, just moving a little bit forward on from there, fast forward a little bit. So this year I'm also doing a master's degree, and because of what I was researching during the summer holidays, I sort of took up that module on AI, and I was researching adaptive learning platforms, which is basically the software.
What's adaptive learning, just for the listeners out there?
Yes, I'll just elaborate. So what they are using in Alpha Schools is a type of adaptive learning platform. And an adaptive learning platform is just an online platform that you can use to learn with, and that's going to sort of personalize your learning. That's going to make your learning more efficient, and it has sort of that learning pedagogy, the learning science embedded within it. And the new forms of these adaptive learning platforms, and if you want to again research this in the literature, it's called Adaptive Learning 3.0. So this is AI-enabled adaptive learning platforms, and this is what the kids of Alpha Schools are using, but they've actually made their own specific one, which is called Timeback. Especially to the industry edtech sort of companies, I think they will be creating more and more of this software.
It's quite interesting what you're saying here, because
yeah.
The latest white paper from the government that's been published about the changes in the curriculum and education, in there's a big emphasis about SEND, and a big emphasis about digital IEPs, basically individual education plans, which are digital. So then I can see from there how it's going to mirror together, and those kind of platforms of adaptive learning will mirror. So for example, a student is disadvantaged, or this disability, or this learning need, so then with there they will use AI customized for them to get this customized tailored route, and that's, I think, where it's come from.
Absolutely. I think it can be very, very good to personalize learning. So whether you're a SND sort of student, SEND, sorry, whether whatever your ability is, it's going to personalize the learning for you, because that's how the software is. If you've got a question wrong, for example, it won't let you carry on, but it'll explain that question to you in a slightly different way, in a more sort of accessible sort of way. And then once you know it, then it'll allow you to progress. From the teacher's perspective, especially the software, they'll have learning analytics and data dashboards, so that the teacher can have very in-depth sort of feedback as to how the student's progressing anyway. But we're just talking about hypothetical trajectories of the education system. But when I was thinking quite deeply about this, I was thinking about, the Oak Academy that we have, the online suite. So again, for the listeners out there, Oak Academy is just from the government, but it's just all online sort of lessons. And it starts right the way from Key Stage 1 all the way probably to Key Stage 4 or Key Stage 5 as well. And it was built around the sort of COVID time. But there's going to be a curriculum change in the next couple of years, so 2028, 2029. And those papers where they outline the curriculum changes, they've described that they'll be making a new online digital version on Oak Academy with all of the lessons. So when I'm thinking about this, I think if they're already going to make this digital version, then why not also create that and sort of use that software wherein you've already got these videos, assessments, etc., and turn that into adaptive learning platforms. Go one stage further. So now you don't have big tech actually sort of controlling the narrative, but it's actually controlled by the government, and students have got all fair equal access to the platforms in that way.
One thing here I'm worried about is the level of speed that things are moving on for the mass public, for professionals themselves. Okay, so before we carry on, from a teacher's perspective, I think it's made my students incredibly lazy. Very important point there, thank you for that. They just type it in, get the answer, and what was your uncle? As for adults, I think it's amazing. It's helping illiterate and maybe not so articulate people in writing emails, etc. So it's helping them immensely. One thing here, though, one big question again to put a spanner in the works. You'll find they're using these AI platforms. A lot of professionals are different. So, for example, a typical, a teacher, okay, very good. They can use that and produce the resources straight away, and you've got your lesson going. You go for a lawyer, a doctor, or a pharmacist, or an engineer. Again, they will be using these AI platforms specifically for them, and you'll find that they will getting all the information. A lawyer, for example, all the cases, thousands and thousands of cases. How easy it is that you can, for example, upload 10 cases together and get a quick summary from there, and that will hopefully move on for the case that they're working on. So it's helping there, but then is it really making more people more professional or unprofessional? And as you just saw in that message that came through, literate or illiterate? This is the question. And going back to what I was saying just before that message, is that my concern is it's moving at such a fast pace. How is the public going to absorb this, and how is the average student, the professional, the average person walking on the on the street there, how are they going to take this on? How is it going to affect shopping? How is it going to affect our finance, our management of our finance itself, and all sorts, A to Z? So effectively, it's actually having an input on all these things. Because I'll give you one example. In China, they're very renowned for this, is that they've got cameras everywhere. Everywhere, and those cameras literally profile. So as soon as you go for it, you can pay with your face. So you don't need no cash, you need no money. You literally show your face, and the facial recognition system will pick that up, and you can pay with your face. It can also be very good on security. So, for example, one example of there's a big flat, set of flats there, and people are coming and going into the flats. So the AI can recognize the amount of people visiting this individual in this flat, and obviously they can see the data analysis, and if they find that somebody is too high, something fishy about here, or something what's going here, why is this person so popular, and this way it actually profiles within. So AI is used in that manner for security, for monitoring, for accountability. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think if you're thinking AI more broader, more generally, I've got some thoughts on that as well.
Go on, open up. We're looking at 10 minutes only. Right, we're looking at time. This is a subject that can go on forever.
Yeah, I just want to, and thanks for the contribution from the listeners. Do contribute and add to the discussion. So yeah, I mean, if you're using ChatGPT in that sort of way, where you're just sort of using it as a Google search, of course, it's going to give you an answer very, very quickly, and that's going to lead to, of course, laziness. And I think there is an argument for, is this going to lead to cognitive decline in the future?
What's this cognitive?
So, like mentally, intellectually, are you going to become, like, let's just say in sort of layman's terms, are you going to get more dumber because you're focusing?
Thick.
You're just, you're just sort of leaning, and you're just sort of leaning so much on AI. And I think there is an argument to be said about that, because I think if I was thinking of this with the example of like my father. So like my father, like mashallah, he knows like a lot of the roads, all over the UK. He knows, how to get here, how to get there, because he grew up in that time without the sat nav.
With a map.
Yeah, with a map. Yeah, and it's surprising nowadays. People, they don't even know how to read maps. They don't have that skill. They don't have that skill anymore. Do you see? So that skill's gone. But let's just say you've got people of that generation, of that era. They've got the roads in their mind. They did, they weren't as reliant, as dependent, as we are. But if I'm going to another city, there's some obviously main sort of motorway routes that I know, but others, I'm just going to use the sat nav. So has that made my life easier? Yes. Cognitively, has that affected me? Probably. So of course, there's an argument, for that. Just moving on a bit then, to look at sort of AI overall. So I think if you're thinking AI overall in industry, it looks as if this AI sort of revolution is just the start of something much bigger, because at the same time you've got now the hardware developing on the other side, which is robots, And you might think of robots as, I don't know, Terminator movie or something, but really we're using robots all the time. Like a Tesla car that's driving itself is a robot on wheels. You could think of a dishwasher as a robot. You're putting these dishes in, it's doing things, and it's sort of giving you dishes. So there's going to be robots that are sort of trained with AI, and what that could lead to is possibly like large scale automation, in everything. So if that leads to large scale automation, yes, of course, a little bit like cars that are self driving and dishwashers that are washing our dishes, washing machines, and other sort of robots that we have in our homes, it could make our lives easier, but at the same time, that could wipe away, many, many jobs, from the whole economy with large scale automation. And what I mean by large scale automation is these robots trained with AI could pretty much do any job. So right now we're already seeing how AI can do a lot of screen related jobs. So anything that's very deep cognitive, mental knowledge based, AI could actually tap into those jobs. I was just looking at the other day, Jack Dorsey, who's like the founder of Twitter. So he's a billionaire as well, but he's got another company called Block. Now, from his company, he's actually had about 10,000 employees. He's laid off about 4,000 of them in one go. 4,000 employees, 40% of his workforce gone, because he's now just going to be using AI. So that's 40% of these top professionals that are probably, a lot of them coders, developers, software engineers, that he's had to just remove. And this has just happened. And when you think about what that's actually done to the stock price of his company, the stock price shot up.
So you could say AI is a vehicle to make the rich richer.
Absolutely.
Right. And unfortunately, on the other side, you might find the disadvantage and the poorer. So this could be a vehicle. Interesting points here. So we've only got 6 minutes, so we need to sum up here now.
Yeah.
So we talked about advantages and benefits. It's going to save us time. It's very good on focused information that you've got. You can be creative with it, and it can make our life easy. But on the other side, there's lots of issues we've just been talking about, especially with privacy, deep fake, about information, is it accurate or not, and people losing jobs, these kind of things we talked about. And generally, where is it all going to? Because at the end of the day, you somewhat feel that we are so getting into technology dependent, and then is it losing that humanity, and it is losing that touch of who we are actually? That's the big question there. Funny enough, I remember many years ago I met one sheikh, and he told me this, that technology at its peak, but at the same time, depression at its peak. So what's going wrong? Anxiety at its peak. What's going wrong? So with all this technology, what's it going to lead to? That's my question.
I think it's probably nice to try to end on a positive
note. Okay.
So I think just looking at our perspective, I mean, we've talked about a lot, but just focusing back on the education side of things, and if we just focus on the model of, what education might look like. So yeah, when we say AI in education, I'm thinking more about adaptive learning platforms, AI-enabled platforms that students can use to accelerate their academic knowledge gain. But that does leave a really interesting opportunity for that human development. And I think even with AI and all the technology in the world, at the end of the day, we're humans, and humans can develop and become the best versions of themselves, and to really find meaning in your life, purpose in your life, to excel at everything, to really go into things that are really going to excite you, that you're passionate about, that you're ambitious on. I think it could create an opportunity there. Let's just say the working week goes down to three days of work, and now you've got another 4 days. So I think now the question is, you talked about depression. I think as educators, the challenge lies with us to really think, how best can we utilize that time? How can we make it as impactful as possible? And when I'm thinking of education, especially as a teacher, I've always sort of come in with a very strong mindset that I need to try. I've been put in a place of authority and sort of leadership to really pass on the best that I have. to the next generation. And when I see the kids that I'm teaching at school, I don't differentiate them from my own children at home. So when I'm thinking of this new education system, like I said, it's in hypothetical trajectory, it could be very exciting because these life lessons and this sort of life education, this human development, this personal development, which I'm very, very passionate about, this could become a huge part of education.
So
Wouldn't
this
that be
is,
beautiful?
I think, they're a very good point, and it's a nice end to this.
Yeah.
That we could see this now, AI in education, what it's all about. That it's going to accelerate the learning of knowledge and skill, and it's going to save time. And that time that we've saved on, then the schools and the teachers and in education, they can focus specifically on the nurturing and the tarbiyah element, and through that, that can be accelerated. So it's a very, very positive spin now here. We're looking out that it's going to save time. We're going to get this knowledge in high levels of education through these means of AI, but the time left over, we're going to utilize it for the nurturing of this individual who will be a better human being for society. And that's the biggest need today in the whole world, that humanity needs that leadership where humanity becomes human, and we have this care and this development. So that's a very positive point that we work with. Zayn, last few points, we've got 1 minute.
Yeah, just one last final point. I think, especially, let's just say the economy does become more automated, but again, we can train, the students to sort of leverage AI properly. So in the same way how Jack Dorsey is leveraging AI to sort of cut nearly half of his, sort of employee base, we could use students, that we're teaching. If we get them to leverage AI, they could become like solo founders and entrepreneurs of their own companies, because now you don't need 10 employees. You can do the job of 10 people just by having the right sort of use and capabilities of actually deploying AI in the right way. Right now there's also OpenClaw, which has just come about, and that's AI agents. So that's just come about in the last month or so. But we could give this training to the next generation. They could actually come about and create their own value in the world. And that's another amazing.
Okay, brilliant, folks. Jazakallah khair for listening, everybody. I hope that was very intuitive and very interesting. The conversation can carry on, continue, and maybe we might come back on another time. But I do say Jazakallah khair for joining us. Thank you for joining us. I hope you have a lovely Ramadan and a lovely Eid, and make sure you utilize the time properly. Alhamdulillah, the timetable of our 24 hours is very important. Jazakallah khair, Brother Zahir, mashallah. Khalid Patel to join us today and may progress in his mashallah masters and his research that he's doing with AI. Dear listeners out there, mashallah, AI is there, artificial intelligence. But I always say this at the end of our shows, alhamdulillah, in the month of Ramadan, we've got AI, artificial intelligence, and we've got AI, Allah's intelligence. Inshallah, Allah Ta'ala guide us, Allah accept us, and Allah become happy with us. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.